Great Tuesday. Welcome to the the Connecting with Intent King Connections podcast. I'm your host, King. I'm joined by a gentleman who is a certified international mentor, book author, and former um, Canadian Mounted Police. Is that correctly?
Royal Canadian Mounted Police.
Royal Canadian Mounted
Yeah,
Police. Well, thank you for that. Well, welcome to the King Connections podcast, Doug Lawrence. How you doing today, Doug?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me.
Glad. Well, one of the first questions I always like to begin with, just to kind of set the context, is what's your spiritual energy number ranging from 0 being life sucks to 10 being life is awesome in this current moment?
9.
Excellent. Excellent. And thank you for indulging with me with that question. Again, the reason I asked that question, I believe it really helps set the energy and the context for the discussion. Because if you're a 2 or 3, depending on what happened in life and how life may be treating you, then it might be best to just reschedule and start at a different day, because it's not going to be a good podcast from that discussion. But you're a 9, so I'm looking forward to our discussion. It's going to be full of energy, and today is definitely a topic that I definitely am going through right now. So I'm definitely very familiar with it, and I'm really interested in starting off your newest book, Grief: The Silent Pandemic. Just really curious about that title, why you chose that title, what inspired you to write this book.
So the grief part, I think, for the most part, is understandable. We all have to go through, or we experience the loss of a loved one and what comes as a result of that, and that's where the grief comes. But the silent pandemic piece, I did a lot of research in preparing this book for publication. And the one thing that seemed to stand out was that we all grieve, but we don't understand how to go about dealing with it, and it just continues. It's sort of, what's the words I'm looking for? It's sort of mushrooms or steamroller, gains momentum. And the one thing that I've always said is that COVID was deemed to be a pandemic. Grief is much the same, if not worse, and we don't treat it as a pandemic, and we need to.
Mm. I'm curious to know your thoughts as far as why do you think our society does not treat grief in the way that it should be treated?
The big thing is it's and I experienced this in a couple, well, with the passing of my mother, and then obviously with the passing of my wife Deborah, but where people they don't know how to deal with it, so they bury their heads. It's the ostrich syndrome is what I call it. They bury their heads in the sand, and if I don't see it, if I don't hear it, then therefore it doesn't exist. And what we need to be able to do, one of the most important things about dealing with grief, is that you must you have to be able to you've got to be able to process the grief that you have. So if you allow yourself to keep adding, heaven forbid that you have multiple deaths over a period of time, but if you excuse me, if you can deal with it, process the grief, then we're in a good place. But if you can't process it and you allow it to build up, then it works as it starts to slowly become more and more of a pandemic.
Hmm. And I'm curious, would you say that the loss of a person, and I'm trying to give this a percentage. I don't know if this question is going to come out correctly, but if we had to break grief down in different pies, percentage pieces, would you say the loss of an individual probably makes the largest part of that pie of the grief scenario?
Yes. And if you're looking to put a percentage, a number with that, I would say that, the loss of, excuse me,
Bless you.
I would say the loss of a loved one is, excuse me, I have something stuck in my throat, obviously. But
I've gone through that, so I know how that feels.
yeah, I would say that the loss of a loved one is probably 85%.
Mm. And that's probably the part that it's the most difficult to get over, and probably you never really get over it. Correct?
No, you don't. Grief, there is no start date and no end date.
Hmm. And how would you say that writing has helped you deal with grief?
It, it um, it's something that is therapeutic for me because I get to tell my story. I get to tell Deborah's story. Deborah being my wife, of course, and so I get to tell both those stories, and, and that's what gives me the, I don't know, I don't want to say peace of mind, but that's what helps me grieve, but also get closure.
Hmm. And just for folks who out there, because we talk about grief with it's one of those words that we use. Like, understand. I think you may be able to define what it means, Webster's definition, but the actual activity of it, putting it into action, I think will be different for each person. So, how would you define grief from that perspective?
It's an emotional, spiritual, physical response to the loss of something. And depending on the magnitude, whether that be the loss of a loved one, whether that be the loss of anything other than a loved one, it's there's going to be, there's going to be the spiritual, the physical part. There's going to be all of those elements are all going to play a part in number one, how you go about healing, but more importantly, what are you healing for?
And the engineer in me likes to compartmentalize and put things in different categories as a way of processing. But is there different ways to process grief over death, depending on who the person was that has died?
I know that, and this is just me speaking, but I know that I processed the loss of my mother differently than what I did processing the loss of my wife. And I think we all go through. Uh, we all have to deal with grief on our own terms, and we also have to be is because I'm grieving more or more intensely or anything like that, say as it relates to Deborah, does that mean I don't or didn't love my mom as much? And no, it doesn't mean anything like that whatsoever. All it is we process, we we should process the grief that we are experiencing. So if I didn't process the grief that I had with the loss of my mom, it would compound itself so that when I go to try to process the loss of my wife, Deborah, it would be that much more difficult of a healing journey for me to go through because I hadn't dealt with the past grief.
And when you say processing, what does processing look like? And how would a person be able to tell whether or not they're processing something properly or not?
Well, that's part of the issue is that there's no right way or wrong way to deal with grief. And so for me, when I talk about processing, it's me being able to manage the grief and not have it manage me. Like an example is, what are some of the coping skills that I used for when my wife Deborah passed, because I had times where I couldn't drive past the hospital where she passed away in, because I hadn't taken the time to sort of process it. And more importantly, I was the macho male that was going to deal with this on my own, and I didn't need any help, when in fact I was in a state that I did need help. And I finally ended up reaching out for counseling, and it was the counseling that helped get me back on track again, to be able to say, okay, the next time you have to travel past the hospital where Deborah passed, is you need to prepare yourself for that journey to take place. And you need to be able to say, I'm going to be okay when I drive past there, because I know she's not she's not there anymore. She doesn't, she's moved. I hate using the term moved on, but that's she's in a better place.
And when you say that, when a person says that, I know this answer depends or differs on each person, but I'm curious to know, when a person says, I accept the fact they move on to a better place, if they really have accepted that. Like, I mean, when I look at my mother in a situation, and I know that she suffered the last 2 years of her life, and it wasn't a good quality of life at all. So for me, I find peace that she has moved on to a better place. Now, I believe I would find it very difficult if she had passed suddenly, like she was healthy, then one day she just passed. I think I would find difficulty in believing that she's moved on to a better place if that was a scenario.
Yeah, I can see that. One of the things that I've done is, I needed with my mom, and certainly with my wife Deborah, I needed to get closure. I needed to get that reassurance that they were in a place where they weren't suffering at all. They were, with basically they were in a good place. And I reached out in both cases for a psychic and a medium in order to get that contact. And I asked a specific question: is, are you okay? Are you in a place where you're not suffering anymore? I miss you, and all, had a conversation per se with both of them. And I that's part of what I go through to get closure. And yeah, I guess that's the best way to leave it, is I use that as a means to get closure.
Mm. I'm curious, were you prepared for whatever answer you got back? Like if they,
Yeah. I think, I, I didn't even know if I was going to get an answer, because, it was, I had people that said, I did this. I went and saw a psychic, or I went and saw a medium and stuff, and this is what they had said, and this is what the outcome of my visit with them. I had no idea whatsoever, of what was going to take place, if anything, and whether or not I was going to be able to make that contact, because I did truly need to have that closure.
mm. Would you say that your work experience with the Canadian Royal Police, Mounted Police, helps you prepare for dealing with grief, or the grief that you've had in your life in any way, shape, form, or fashion?
I would say in some context, yes. And a large part of it was due to um, with the Royal Canadian Mounted Police and policing in remote locations, and sometimes being the only person there, you developed relationships with people that lived in the community, so that when one of them passed away, it was like losing a member of your family, and you ended up having to be able to deal with it. Like I one of the ones I remember very vividly is the young 16-year-old that made our men's hockey team, because we were going to go down the highway a ways and we were going to play the neighboring community. And he was 16 years of age, made the team. He was absolutely ecstatic, goes home to tell his parents, only to arrive at home and find that both his mother and father were drunk. They had drunk themselves into oblivion, and because of that, he ended up death by suicide, because his support structure had crumbled.
Mm.
And right, so and I ended up, because I was one of two police officers in that community, but I primarily ended up I was at the hockey rink when we selected the team, and then I ended up being the police officer investigating his death. I ended up being the police officer that transported him to a morgue that was 8 hours ahead by vehicle in the middle of 40 below winter time.
Mm.
So I had, all of that, and all of it had an impact on me as an individual. Um, I think that we as police officers in some of those remote communities, we find different coping mechanisms to be able to help deal with the grief that we're now experiencing.
Mm. Now, notice in your book you talk about the misconceptions that and people have as far as understanding of what grief means. What are some of the common misconceptions which you said that people have about grief?
Well, the main one is that there's a start date and an end date to grief, and that's sadly overstated, because grief doesn't have an end to it. It's something that you're going to have to deal with, perpetually, I guess, is probably the words I'm looking for. And there's the other part of, I don't know what to say, so I'm just not going to say anything at all. Instead of, sort of coming at it from the aspect of, how would I put this? I want to be able to help you, but I'm not sure how I can help. Could you please give me your guidance on how I can help you on your healing journey? And what are some of the, things that I can, maybe it's better by simply saying, is listening and hearing sufficient support for me to provide to you, or would you like me to, have more of a conversation and stuff? And I mean, we could fine tune and tweak how that goes, but I know that one of the main things, in addition to, listening and hearing, but one of the things that's really important is the aspect of, making sure that if I make a commitment, I'm going to follow through on it.
Mm.
Because the big thing I found, we did a celebration of life, and I had people I hadn't seen in quite a while come up to me and say, we should go for lunch. We can, I've got some stories I'd like to be able to share about Deborah with you. And, you sure, give me a call, or send me an email and we'll set something up. 4 years have passed and nothing has happened.
Mm. You know, that's a good point. I always wondered, and because I was never, we never talked about grief in my family, until something happened. Not something you talk about. So when you hear friends and family members who suffer a loss, now I'm awkward because I don't know what to say.
Yeah.
Do I say, my thoughts and prayers are with you and your family? That seems to be the politically correct way to say it. You just hear politicians say it all the time. Or, as you just said, should I just listen? But never being taught that, I was always uncomfortable even having a conversation with somebody who I know just had an immediate death in the family because I just didn't know what to say. So I would avoid having a conversation with them just out of that ignorance. And with your experience as a mentor, what are some of the things you would say can help a person get over that awkwardness and try to be a good friend without being too overbearing and saying the wrong things? That's the main thing. I didn't want to say the wrong thing and trigger something that I in the person that would cause them to suffer even more.
Well, the big thing is to be in tune with the body language. So with their body language, and if you say something and you get a sort of a negative response body language wise, is you just need to say so. I'm so sorry. It appears as though I may have offended you. Please help me. Please help me understand how I could say that differently, or what I could do differently that would help you with, because I can only imagine the pain and suffering that you're going through. I can only imagine. I've never experienced that myself, and I can just only imagine. And I want to be able to help, whether it's going for a coffee, but the thing to remember is that, and I know I'm in much the same boat, is that um, you periodically, and it's probably more often than not, is you need that person that you can who will listen and hear while you sort of process or talk about or unload all of the issues that you have bottled up inside of you that deal with how you're grieving the loss of this loved one. So, in the case of, Deborah, it is, if you have a story to tell me, please tell me the story, so that, that we have a common bond between us, that, you had an experience where, she was that social butterfly type of a person that interacted with everybody, no matter whether she knew them or not. And we need to get that story out there, because that's going to help me realize that, these people that come up to me and say, oh, Deborah was a great person, but they had no experience with her whatsoever. So it's being able to sort those things out and figure those out, and just know that if you can listen and hear, is the most important thing. That, and I sound like a broken record, but if you can listen and hear, and 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 be in a place where you can, be able to help support them through just that listening and hearing, I think, we're in a better place because of that.
I would agree. I think that again, to the point of your book and what you said earlier, in our society, we definitely value the wrong things. We put our effort and intentions on the things that are not in our best interest and things that we need help with. Like, for example, dealing with a parent who's getting older, and that was the stage I had to go through, and everyone deals with that. That's a human thing. No one is immune from that unless their parents die at an early age. But no one really talks about that much. No one really prepares you. There's no rites of passage or process to go through to say when you hit 40 and you hit 50 years old, your parents should be at a stage where now it's going to reverse. Now they're going to need more support from you, and you're going to have to step up and take care of your parents for the first time, and that's going to be a a whole thing there, and you just have to go through that. And what I found, there was nobody really to talk to about it.
Yeah.
And then I think about one of my favorite books I use as my Bible was The Seven Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen R. Covey. I read it probably more than 150 times. I referred to it quite a bit. And one of the things he talks about in that book, and I find myself dealing with this and talking to someone who's grieving. He didn't say this in reference to that, but I always put this thought in my mind. He talks about how when you're talking to your kids and just listening instead of trying to tell them your experience. Like if your kid is doing something, the first thing out of your mouth is to come back with, well, when I was your age, or when I went through that, this is what happened. And that came back to me because what I didn't want to hear from people when my mom passed, the first couple of weeks, I didn't want to hear that conversation about what they went through when their mom passed. I didn't want them to just try to relate to me on that level right there, because it was like, unless you're going through exactly what I've gone through, which is literally watching my mom suffer for 2 years, the hospitals to the rehab facilities to the misdiagnosis, the doctors not having a clue, and just more increased medication, and all those things that the family dealing with my brother and how he handled it, how he processed it, added more to the stress and anxiety. So for me, it was like all that was combined into that process. And for someone to say, well, yeah, my mom died when, you remember my mom died when we was 30. So I know what you're going through. And it's like, no, you don't know what I'm going through. And for you to just, trivialize it like that or try to relate to it like that is just making it worse. So I just kind of wanted to see what your thoughts were. Am I wrong for that process?
Not at all. No, not at all. You need to be able to grieve on your terms, not on somebody else's terms. And when people try to sort of force, I when my mom passed away, I did this, so therefore you should do this. That that doesn't work well. One of the things that part of the mentoring process that I add into this is, you know, I, is the idea of framing things in the context of a question. So you want to be able to help. So I wonder what would happen if we were to do this, or if you were to do this, or I wonder what would happen if we did this, or this, and throw the ideas out on the table, but with no expectation that you're going to pick that up. You never know. Somebody may throw a gem in front of you, and you'll be going, well, gosh, I wish I would have had this 2 months ago.
Hmm.
So it's just a matter of, because we talk a lot about listening and hearing and going through, making sure that's part of it. You can also use the question and answer type technique as well to be able to provide some guidance, but also at the same time be able to, um, it, by doing it that way, that gives people the chance to feel as though they've contributed to how you know, what some of the outcomes could very well be.
Hmm. Another thing, when I think about grief, I always think about, or again, from a context until I started going through it now myself, I always associated grief with sadness. Like they could have been synonyms for the most part. Like it's just a constant sadness. Um, but as I hear you talk about a process, I'm learning that maybe grief is not just sadness in itself. Maybe it's a phase of sadness, maybe a phase of grief
Yeah.
or a stage of grief, but not necessarily it doesn't encompass grief in its totality. So what other forms of or phases of grief would you say there are that a person can be going through or a person will go through?
Well, I think it's more so. Well, and I want to back up with regards to your comment about the sadness part. I think we've changed. Society has changed because now we talk more so about a celebration of life,
Mm.
and we go through uh, as a community as a whole processes grief simply by having by doing the celebration of life. Because I know we did that for Deborah, and we actually did that for my mom as well. But Deborah is more familiar to me right now, and you know we all came to a common meeting place, and we told stories about Deborah and what she was like and how we interacted, and so a whole thing. And it took her passing, and it moved it from being a very sad and a very sad situation to something that there was an opportunity to share some of the experiences that people had with her. And I think that helped make it more of a positive situation. Now, I'm sorry, what was your other point?
Well, different phases of
Ah, so there's, I think there's 6 or 7 different phases that you may go through it. And I'm hesitant to use those because people will automatically say, well, there's 6 phases, therefore I must have to go through all 6, and I must go through them in order of significance, importance, whatever. And nothing could be further from the truth. They are guides. So there's denial, there's denial, and I'm trying to think of some of the others off the top of my head, but there's a number that that you can go through, but you don't have to go through them. It's not mandatory that I'm going to go through the denial phase, or the anger is another one. I experienced anger, I experienced denial, disbelief. There was just a number of the different steps, if you want to call it, or the phases, or yeah, that's probably the best way. That there was a number of those that you could actually go through, but you don't need to. And that's, I think, the point that we're trying to make here, because we're grieving on our own terms. We're defining what they are. We don't need to have somebody or someone to prescribe, okay, you should be, today is the 4th day of your grieving, it should be looking like this. Not at all.
Yeah, that definitely is something that makes me think about if you are different people you have in your lives and their roles. So, for example, an employer might want you to get over grief a little faster, differently, and maybe even a spouse or even kids. Everybody selfishly wants you to get back to a state you were prior to the loss, and so they may trigger them saying, "Well, it's been 2 weeks, or it's been a month, or it's been 2 years. At what point are you gonna get over it, so to speak, and move on?" And to your point, grief can be indefinite. As long as you're alive, you can still be grieving for the person, but grieving differently depending on what phase. I definitely want to pick back up on some more questions around that on the other side. What I want to do right now is take our sponsorship break, and then we'll pick back up on the questions on the other side.
The playbook for growing a local business online is simple. Capture new leads, conversationally convert those leads into sales, turn those customers into positive reviews, and then reactivate those customers into repeat buyers. And that's exactly what our platform does. In order to consistently generate new leads, you first need to be found. The quickest way to get search engines like Google to put your business at the top of search results is by having a steady flow of positive reviews. With our platform, you can show up in search and stand apart from your local competition by easily collecting new customer reviews through text. But getting found is only the beginning. Most consumers choose the first business that responds to them. So unless you start conversations with potential customers almost instantly, they'll go somewhere else. That's why we make starting conversations with website visitors as easy as clicking a button, connecting you instantly through text message so the conversation doesn't end when they leave your website. And we bring all your leads, no matter where they come from, into a single conversation stream that supports text, email, video messaging, Google Business Chats, and even Facebook and Instagram DMs, so you can respond faster and more efficiently than ever. When it comes to turning all those conversations into customers, we make collecting payments just another convenient part of the combo, so you get paid faster no matter how they prefer to pay. Next, you'll want to turn your new customers into happy reviews, which is a snap with our new review request quick actions. The more conversations and customers you generate, the easier it becomes to drive repeat business. We make reactivating contacts into customers as easy as, yup, you guessed it, the push of a button. With bulk actions, you can send out text and email campaigns to generate new sales whenever you have a new update, promotion, or story to tell. We make modern online marketing simple. Let's start growing your business today.
Okay, we're back, and we're on the second part of our show, interviewing Doug Lawrence, talking about his new book, Grief, the Silent Pandemic. So as we piggyback on the second question I wanted to ask is, how would you say that grief has helped to kind of shape your understanding of love, loss, and what truly matters?
I would say that what it's done as far as with death is the loss of a loved one or the loss of love, and we need to be able to obviously process that, and I hate we're using the word process a lot, but to be able to take that and move that forward so that we're in a place where we know that, in my case, the loss of Deborah was there is now a gap in sort of the people that I would say that there's love for. There's now this gap that exists because of her passing, and so I would say that grief and death in general plays a very significant part or role in who we love, how we love, and all of those things.
Now, if we look at grief as being a teacher, what has it taught you about how, let me find a better way to say this. What has it taught you about being more fully human with respect to being empathetic to others and having emotional intelligence about other human beings?
It's taught me a lot. I got to experience, certainly grief, the silent pandemic is one particular thing that came as a result of my experience. But for me, what's important is that what I've learned from being exposed to grief at the magnitude that I've been at, not only dealing with grief and my own personal healing journey, but the healing journey of others that I've worked with, that if you approach it from the aspect of love, it's I know that's what I do, and I find that I'm able to deal with Deborah's loss better than maybe what I could have. And it's only because of having a deeper understanding of love and what love means as a result of what we've gone through.
Now, you mentioned your wife, Deborah, several times. I'm curious to know, how long were you all married?
It was 43 years.
And do you remember when you first met?
Yes, I do. I do remember very, very distinctly. It was on the side of a road in northern British Columbia, and she was coming up to the community that I was policing in. She was coming up there to stay with her aunt and uncle and work for the Department of Highways at that particular time. Unbeknownst to her, I had great plans for her future. And so, yeah, it started that way. And I always refer to her as my photo album bride. And what I mean by that was that I was over visiting her aunt and uncle in this community we were in. They hauled out their family photograph photo album, and there was this picture of Deborah, and I said, "Who's that?" And they said, "That's our niece." And I said, "Well, then get her up here." And she came up, and probably 6 months later we were engaged to be married, and from
Wow.
the story continues.
Wow. Now, 43 years obviously is a long time to be with somebody. Is there any kind of advice you would give to people who want to try to sustain something just a quarter of the years of that?
You know, and sadly enough, I think we have to experience loss in order to appreciate, what it is that we actually have. And I know that every chance you get, you need to embrace and cherish the love that you have today with whoever your significant other, whoever your partner is, whatever family member that you're socializing with, for lack of a better choice of words, I guess. But you need to be able to embrace that and make the most of it, because you never know when that journey is going to end.
Is there, I know for me that there's a lot of things that trigger thoughts about my mom now.
Yeah.
And I realize it's really the little things, Sundays, for example. Growing up, Sunday was always a very special day because that's when we ate dinner as a family, more than any other day of the week. And then Sunday always meant going to church, so then it's dinner after church. And then her listening to her gospel music throughout that morning process, then while she's preparing food. So gospel songs, those things. So my question would be, is there a process or a set of steps that you kind of put yourself to be aware that you might start slipping into a grieving period when you don't necessarily want to be in a grieving period?
The big thing is to be able to get yourself to a place where you can manage your grief, but not have your grief manage you. And I know that sounds easier said than done, but I know for me to be able to do that, and there's, definitely there's some other coping mechanisms and stuff, family dinners and stuff like that. How we deal with that in our family is we set a extra place setting at the table
Mm.
so that you know it's not out of sight, out of mind. It's we're here to honor Deborah, and we keep that place setting there. And there's other things that you know that we would be able to do. Like I know that she has some friends, and so I've kept up contact with some friends that she had that kind of went by the wayside a bit when she passed on. And I try to keep those relationships alive as much as I possibly can because I know it was important to her.
Mm. Do you find yourself, if you're watching a movie or maybe listening to the radio, that if a certain song comes on or a certain movie that was her favorite or yours favorite, does that trigger grief, or
Yeah.
does it trigger kind of a pleasant memory in that space, or does it depend?
It depends on whereabouts I am on that particular day. If I'm, and it can be the song, the mostly music. Music is a big trigger for me. So if I know that that's going to take place, then I try to put that into a positive context of some sort. Is that you know I'm emotional because here this Hallelujah is was her favorite song, so I'm emotional because of that. But it's I keep telling myself it's Deborah's way of saying I'm still here, and um, I thank you for keeping my song alive in your memories, and being able to do that has made it a lot easier for me to deal with her loss. Doesn't help make it go away completely, and I would never expect that, but it does help with being able to process her loss.
Do you see a path forward for someone who had a loss of a wife or a husband after a 40-year period of marriage? They can move on to possibly date someone else or be in a relationship with someone else. You think that's a path forward for that?
I definitely think that that's part of or could be part of your journey as well. And you can certainly come to terms with your, like in my case, I can certainly come to terms with Deborah as to whereabouts we are in having that conversation around moving. I'm not going to say that in developing and putting into practice a relationship that is going to be something that she would approve of.
Mm. Do you find yourself on certain holidays, maybe a birthday, kind of having a Deborah day where you just kind of want to be in that space where you just want to be in a reflective, remembering set and don't want anything else outside it disturbing you from that?
Yeah, yeah. And I think we all, those that have or are experiencing the loss of a loved one, whether it's a husband, a wife, family of any context, you have to give yourself space and to be able to say this is for me, this is my time that I need to be able to just go in, and I will go sit someplace in the house and clear my mind and allow myself to share those memories that are so significant and important, and to be able to do that. So um, that's that's how I process, or that's how I deal with certainly the loss of Deborah and my mom for that matter.
I know I made my mother, or I made a playlist of what I perceive to be my mother's favorite songs, or songs that at least reminds me of my mother. And I play those songs now, but I play a playlist because I want to put myself in that mode where I just really want to be in this hour or two or a day or whatever, how long I want to be in that space. This is for remembering and honoring my mother, and that playlist helps me do that. And I know for me, it's still really fresh and still new, and not knowing, what the future is going to hold for myself. But I know we're getting to the top of the hour, but I want to kind of give our listening audience. That's why I was thinking about this process now. Are there some practical steps you can give people to help them who are new to the grief world, like the death that just recently passed, to kind of say, here's some things you kind of want to do to help get yourself in a processing point, or just preparing yourself to be able to deal with life now after the loss?
The most important thing that I think that we can do is to know that there are people who would like to be able to help us, and they have walked in these shoes before us, and therefore they are a good resource, a good coping mechanism to be able to say, I lost my wife due to whatever the reasons, and while I appreciate that everybody must grieve on their own terms, or on their own terms, here are some things that I did that helped me in dealing with the grief, and be able to share some of those with them. I'm part of a bereavement support group, and that's the approach that we take, is that we encourage people to, if you feel that a good cry is going to be the answer, then have a good cry, and it's okay to reach out and ask for help, and to be able to say, I'm really struggling here. I didn't think that, losing my wife was going to be as difficult as what it has been. Or, you come up with different things that you find comfort in, that help you remember the loss of your loved one. And I think if, you can do some of those things, and be able to put those into practice, I think that's going to help. But the support group, if I could, I'd like to be able to stress that is definitely something. Any chance you get to be part of a support group that deals with bereavement and the loss of a loved one, please, please, please take the time to do so. It's time well spent.
Excellent. And as we get ready to wrap up, I think one of my last questions may be, so you created your organization, it's a TalentC?
Yes.
And that organization was created after Deborah's passing?
It was before she passed.
Before she passed.
Yeah.
And would you say that you continue to do your mentorship work and the work you're doing with TalentC as a way of honoring your memory of her?
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. And, there's the mentoring part that I do in honor of her. And there's also being the author of books, like the Grief, the Silent Pandemic was most definitely in honor of her. It's her story.
Do you find it easier to write a book about her than it was the other books you've written? Like, are the words there? You don't get writer's block. You're able to just kind of flow and.
I still got writer's block a bit, not as much as what I did for the previous book. But what I found that was most difficult for me was the telling of stories as it relates to her. So, as an example, it was when we went to the hospital, to the emergency room, because her family doctor had said something's not right and you need to go. And when I tell that in the book, the fact is that became something that was very emotional, and I had a very difficult time in continuing on with the writing of the book until I was able to kind of wrap my head around being able to dealing with those triggers of some of the experiences that we had that actually formed or shaped part of the book. I needed to be able to figure out how to deal with that first before I did too much more writing, and I was able to do so, but certainly not without some pain and agony as a result of that.
How long did it take you to write the book?
It was about 2 years.
Okay. Well, I definitely want to again thank you again, Doug, for joining the King Connections podcast. I want to give you the opportunity to share any last minute words of wisdom and any contact information, anywhere they can purchase your book or anything else you want to share with our listening audience as well.
So the book is available on Amazon.com, and you can certainly pick up a copy from there. You can, if you want to reach out and have a conversation with me for whatever the reasons, you can do so through my website at www.TalentC, the word talent with the letter C on the end, .ca. And there's a contact page that you can go to. You can also direct message me on LinkedIn. And as the last step, you can send me an email to doug.lawrence, LAWRENCE, at TalentC, so the word talent with the letter C on the end, .ca, and just send me an email message and I'll get back to you as soon as I possibly can.
Well, again, thank you, Doug, for your investment of time and energy for joining our show today.
Thank you.
This show is live, but we're going to do we're going to post it later with some edits, and I'll make sure I put all your links that you shared will be in the comment section, so folks can click on those links as well.
Thank you.
And listening audience, thank you again for listening to another episode of the King Connections podcast. And to our next episode, that's all. Remember to continue to connect with intent. Thank you.